to record this meeting. There we go. All right, so thank you for that. I'd like to, at this point, have a chance for anyone. I'd like to recognize people who are here who hold volunteer roles in ARRL and elsewhere. So anybody who is on the ARRL board or associated with the ARRL board, please state your name and call sign so everybody knows who you are.
KG7 MWH.
Okay, are you on the ARRL board?
1 and 2.
I am not on the board.
Okay. So Tony, are you there? I'm waiting for you.
Yeah, but just making sure no one else was popping
Okay.
in. So Tony Marson, W7XM Vice Director for the Pacific Division.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, then let's next go to ARRL section managers. I know we have a few on the call here.
NV6W ARRL Santa Clara Valley.
Mike Patterson, N6JGA, Dewsbury section.
Okay, I'll leap in. Bill Hillendahl, KH6GJV, San Francisco section manager.
This is Carol Milazzo, KP4AMD, Sacramento Valley section.
Any others? I see John trying to talk, but it's muted.
Yeah, get Nevada there.
Still muted.
Did you need me?
Let me see if I come through now.
That's
I'm in
better.
3 Zoom meetings at one time, folks. John and some of you are in Nevada.
All right, John. Anybody else? Section managers. Okay, how about ARRL field staff? You know, that would be anybody who's filling a volunteer position for your section manager at any level.
AC7CE, Nevada section PIC.
6 Sugar Tango Nevada section youth coordinator, and happy to help anybody else in the division also if you need anything.
Do you have any others? All right, I guess not. Let's next see if there are club presidents out there.
This is Dave, and I'm KK6 MVJ for Elk Grove, Warren.
This is John, K7JGV, President of Hayward Radio Club.
This is Michael Van Kleenput for K6WK for the Reading Veterans Amateur Radio Club.
Chris
Adams here. Chris Adams here, KG6WEG with Oakland Radio Communication Association.
And I'll chime in here. This is Bob, K6RMW, and I'm the president of the Fremont Peak Repeater Association.
And this is Bill N6BCD in the Santa Clara Valley section.
This is KB6 USJ Mike in Calaveras County, Public Information Officer for the Calaveras Amateur Radio Club.
Good morning, everyone. This is Joel, India Golf, President of the Radio Club in Sacramento.
Anybody else?
This is Kilo 7 Zulu Zulu Quebec in Mesquite, Nevada.
All right. Okay, I'm gonna ask everybody to mute when you're not talking, if you could do that. Otherwise, I'm going to mute you. This makes the meeting easier for all of us. All right. I have to mute a couple here. Okay, so thank you all very much for the work that you do. Clubs are the backbone of our organization and our hobby. They're what makes things go. Without clubs, we would not have all of the great interaction that we have as ham radio operators. It's really important that we meet either on Zoom or face to face so that we can talk about the things that are important to us and talk about what matters to ham radio. So the way I'd like to run this meeting, and it's okay to interrupt me with questions at any time, is I'd like to talk about some things that I think are important about what's going on with ARRL, and then generally open it up to questions and answers. But first I want to get through a bunch of stuff, and I'm happy to take some questions in the middle, but I'd like to limit their time so I can at least get through the things that I wanted to talk about and share with all of you. So the first thing I have here is the sort of amateur radio state of the union, and where are we and with ham radio, and where do we see it from at least the board's perspective. I guess the biggest thing is that the FCC is still kind of stuck on stupid. They're not responsive in any reasonable way to anything that we have tried so far. And you may have noticed that there are a number of actions pending before the FCC, and those actions are just doing nothing. They have basically ignored us, and it's getting to the point, and I'll talk about something a little later on that's working its way into Congress, where we have to take that route to try and get some kind of response from the FCC. But they seem to be just politically paralyzed and don't want to make any decisions around amateur radio. And it's not for lack of trying on our part. We have, talked to them, and our FCC counsel is very good, knows those people over at the FCC, and they just will not move. And, they kind of have this excuse that they have been away for COVID out of their buildings for a long time, but, of course, they're working from home as well. So that's not really an excuse. So that's a real problem going forward. We can't ask for rule changes, or we can ask, but it doesn't go anywhere. And there's a couple of really important ones that are pending, and one of the most important is the so-called symbol rate proposal. And that's the one where we would regulate the band segments by symbol rate, and be able to do away with the silliness where every time there is some kind of weather event, we have to ask for a waiver for PACTOR 4. And that's just a waste of time for everybody. And, the bureaucracy has to churn to do its thing every time that comes up, and it's just not worth it. So I don't know what we're going to do there other than push them a little harder and push them legislatively. One of the things that we're all concerned about is number of active licensees. And while if you look at the license statistics, they're kind of steady, maybe going up a little bit, the number of actual active licensees seems to be in decline. That's of course hard to determine. But we've seen also drops in ARRL membership. Some of that may be economic. People don't want to spend the $50 or whatever to become members of ARRL. But we have to think about that more deeply and think, what's driving the lack of activity. And I think part of it is that clubs have not been able to meet in person for a long time, and some of them are back, but they're not back at the levels they were before. Maybe you've seen this in your own club. I've seen it in the clubs I've visited. And, you know, understandably in many respects, but it still affects the situation here where we have to figure out how we're gonna go forward with declining numbers of active hams. And then that affects everything, you know, from de-expeditions right down to your local club's budget. And it's not a great situation. So if you know hams in the area, if you know hams in the division, you in your section or whatever, your club, get them to get on the air and, you know, get more active to see what's going on in the division, see what's going on the air, you know, have some fun on the radio, because that's what we're all here for. And so that's one thing. Well, a good thing that's out there is that our spectrum defense is having some wins lately. We took a big hit on the 3.4 gigahertz band. We kind of lost access to that. We tried really hard to make that not happen. You know, we worked with the FCC and they were just didn't want to budge on that one. But there's two new things. One was at 5 gigahertz, and that seems to be a spectrum sharing situation, and that's a good outcome for us. So we remain secondary there. And then there's a new one at 10 gigahertz, and the authors of the proposal for the 10 gigahertz piece of spectrum they're interested in are very open to sharing with hams. They even have a plan for it. So it's not all dark news. That's some bright stuff, and it's hard with some of these spectrum slices because there's a lot of industry money. You know, there's billions, tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars sometimes involved in these spectrum fights, especially anywhere near where a cell phone can operate. And it's tough for us to compete. We have a lobbying firm. They work with the legislators, and we have our FCC counsel that works directly with the FCC, and we press them hard. But it isn't always possible to have a win in every situation. But we have had a few wins lately, and that's good news. Back to the bad news, I think that our standing within the emergency communications world continues to decline. And there's still a lot of activity, I think, for, you know, during emergencies. For a lot of you, I'm sure you see it. But I think overall, there's a trend towards digital communications for emergency communications. And there's a group that was very active in the Fort Myers Hurricane Ian situation that basically came in with a bunch of routers and switches and point-to-point radio links and cellular links and all of that stuff, and especially Starlink, and was able to bring up internet connections for people, which really saved the day for them. And you know, that if anything, that's more important than any kind of voice contact or passing traffic and things like that. So that's another, you know, thing that we have to be aware of going forward. I think having eyes open is a lot more important than eyes closed on these kinds of situations. We have to recognize that our role with emergency communications in general is diminishing. And we have to make sure that we focus on our relevance in the world as we see it, not in the world as we'd like to see it. There's some really good news, I think, is what's going on at ARRL headquarters. Headquarters is going really strong. I think that our new CEO, David Minster, is just doing a bang-up job. He's, you know, he's a tough guy. He can take the criticism and the heat if you need to throw it at him. But he gets the job done. It takes time, but he does get the job done. And I haven't seen this kind of action, this level of action and responsiveness at headquarters, you know, in the 40 years I've been a ham. So I'm really encouraged by David Minster and his team over there. He's done a lot of work to get the team members more motivated, more engaged with what he's trying to do. And now we get new things like anybody seen the ARRL 100 handbook? It's pretty slick. It's a very nice handbook, and it's very nicely done, and the art is great. And the team that does all of that stuff is doing really great jobs as too. So upgrading the graphics, someone new may be coming on that's going to be able to do video content a lot better, and so make the ARRL look a little more modern and fun and that kind of thing. That might help us get more people who are of the younger demographic in. So I'm really encouraged by all of that stuff, and I have a really good personal relationship with David Minster. We talk on the phone quite frequently, and he's a good guy. He's just tough, and that's what's required at this point, I think. I don't know if you've all heard, but this coming year, 2023, is the year of the volunteer. Has everybody heard about that? No? Well, I guess that'll be announced in more detail soon, but there'll be an operating event associated with that. And the whole idea is that, volunteerism is something that is also in decline. It gets harder and harder to fill these positions out here for people who are doing volunteer work for not just ARRL, but anything, even things way outside our hobby, are having trouble filling volunteer positions. And ARRL runs on volunteer work. Staff at the headquarters, they get paid, of course, but it's all of you people in the field that really make the difference. And so what ARRL wants to recognize that contribution by volunteers and make sure that all of you feel as though you're appreciated, which you certainly are. I don't know exactly how the program's going to roll out, but at the very least, there'll be an operating event. I hope it's a lot more than that. That's really important. And, just to go back to this thing about volunteerism, there was recently, I think around October or so, an event at headquarters in Connecticut to meet and greet all the people who were in the Connecticut section. And part of that was, believe it or not, to recruit a section manager, because there's no section manager there, right where ARRL headquarters is. So all of you who do this volunteer work, who fill these positions, you really make the difference. And it's tough to find the great people, but the people we have are really great, every one of you. And the other thing that happened this year that I think was really good was headquarters took what used to be the operating station for staff when they were just had a few off minutes at lunch or whatever, to operate at the W1HQ station. This is separate from W1AW, and it was kind of their in-house station, because the staff don't really use W1AW. That's for members. And they took that and then completely redid it. It used to be just your typical ham shack with a few radios on the shelf, but they made it into a slick operating position. I know there's pictures you can find out there and a couple of videos as well of that, and made it very modern, cable trays and all that stuff, so that they could keep all the wires out of the way, and lots of computer monitors. And they use Node-RED in there for controlling devices, and Raspberry Pis and all that stuff. So I think that was really fun to see that get modernized and become more of a model station than just something for staff. So that's what's going on at headquarters that I know about, that I thought was really fun. I actually have not been in the building in a while. I'm hoping maybe this January they'll let us in, because the board meeting comes up in January around the 20th or so, and get inside and see what's going on inside, because it has been a few years. We basically get stuck at this hotel, which is pretty boring. And it's nice to get out and actually see headquarters. And we used to have our committee meetings there too. That'd be great. Finances. Let's talk about finances at the ARRL. So I'm sad to report that the ARRL is running a structural deficit at this point. It's a not trivial deficit. And it's something that we are not happy about. And at some point, we may have to cut programs. We don't want to do that. But the way things are structured right now, it's kind of not cutting it. And I'm not quite sure how we're going to make that up. Part of it is just changes in the world. You know, publishing is not a very profitable business. Getting materials to publish on paper is getting to be harder and harder. You know, a lot of these publications that you get are running right at break even. I think QEX and NCJ are at break even. And if they drop below break even, we'll have to think about what to do. You know, what will we stop publication? Or that's not likely, but we might have to go all electronic on something like that. It's tough times and tough decisions coming up about what to do with revenue. And I know our Vice Director Tony here, he's on the revenue subcommittee trying to figure out how to increase revenue. And we have other things coming up around that, including strategic planning. So I'm on the strategic planning committee trying to figure out where we're going to go as an organization over the next 5 to 10 years. And that's a tough thing to do, of course, but included in that is how we get rid of the structural deficit and how we make it up with donations or anything else. It's a tough one because the ARRL has not increased its spending significantly. It's just that other things have shifted around it, but that happens, right? And, you know, I mentioned donors. We've got a lot of work to do on donors. ARRL, it's a very important part of ARRL's so-called income, I guess, that we have donors, and the donors, and some of them are pretty big donors, give to the ARRL because they support the mission and they believe in what we're doing. And we have an appreciation dinner for them, of course, at every date. But I don't think we've seen a decline in donors, but we also haven't seen an increase. And so we need to do more active development work to have more donations to help the ARRL close that budget gap. Of course, we've been working with ARDC to get grant money, and that's grant for hams as for the most part. I mean, that's not grant money to help ARRL run its day-to-day business. If you've seen the ARRL Club grant program, that comes from donations from ARDC that they disperse to ARRL, and then we disperse in turn to clubs to work on worthy projects. So we hope to continue that relationship with ARDC, but that goes directly to the members. So we still have to figure out how to balance the finances correctly with ARRL. We now, as I mentioned, maybe last year, we had the investment management committee, which I was part of, to help identify where we would put our money, because our money was managed by one single person who was a great person, Rick Niswander. He was W7GM, I think is called K7GM. He is a great guy and all that, but you know, what if the poor guy gets hit by a bus? We'd be in deep trouble. And so we decided to shift all of that money to an investment management firm so that they could have custody at least of the funds and have fiduciary responsibility over the funds, more importantly, so that they can protect them, especially during these, you know, crazy mixed up times on Wall Street, where stocks and bonds are decorrelated and all kinds of weird stuff is going on. So it's really good to have that in place. We have, I think, 3 outside members of the investment management committee, and they are people who are well familiar with the financial markets and finance in general, and they are helping to guide how we interact with CapTrust. And we chose an organization that works with a lot of nonprofits, and they're very good at that. And they have charge of very low fees, actually, as it turns out. And that wasn't the major deciding factor. You know, fees are, of course, important, but it just turned out that the best one actually charged the lowest fees in this case. Let's see, what else can I tell you about? The leagues I complained, I think, before when we spoke about the IT situation at ARRL. I think it's a lot better now. We have a director of IT now, Steve Berry, N1 Echo Zulu. And Steve is a great guy and very gung-ho and loves to kind of tinker in the bits and the wires and all that stuff. And I think that's a real good addition. I know that David Minster is very much impressed and pleased with Steve's work, and that will help ARRL kind of get out of its place where it's been stuck for a long time, where that basically nothing was happening. But Steve's been able to move forward on a number of initiatives. Most of them have been invisible to the outside world so far, but at least being able to do things like fix stuff when it breaks, that's a big deal, and it has really improved things with headquarters. So projects that are coming up would probably involve the website and things like that. I think those are the highest priority. Sadly, not much is going to happen with Logbook of the World. I think that's been the priority of Logbook of the World has been pushed down because it's working as is for the moment. So I don't think we're going to see much in the way of changes to Logbook of the World over the next year. So everything's on hold there. But other stuff is moving forward, and that's good. And really, he had to get back to basics and making sure stuff was properly backed up and that kind of level of thing. So it takes time to get that fixed up. Let's see, we have, I mentioned the spectrum battles at 10 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz. That's coming up. I hope that that doesn't go into legislative overtime. Hopefully the FCC can respond to that. One thing we have coming up is a national convention. We haven't decided. The last national convention was in 2022 in Orlando at Orlando Hamcation. For those of you who were there, it was a great event. It was really fun. Lots of fun things happened. Lots of great talks and other topics. But ARRL's trying to do national conventions a little more regular basis. For a while, there were none for years and years. And then we had one here in Santa Clara some years back. And we might, I don't know, at some point when we have the resources, try to bring one here again. I think that would be really fun, but I don't think we're quite in a position to do that right now, but maybe on the next cycle. So I suspect it'll probably be the Huntsville Hamfest, maybe, or something like that, something again in the Southeast. But that's just a guess. We'll make a decision on that, I think, in January at the board meeting. Let's see what else here. The ECFSC, that's the Emergency Communication Field Services Committee, has now been operating for about a year. And that committee's job is to work on things like ARES and how emergency services work and things like that. I think I haven't seen as much as I'd like to see out of that committee yet. Not a lot going on here that I think is relevant to people in the field, which I think is more the kind of work it should be doing. Right now, they're working on the relationships, trying to define the relationships between headquarters staff and field staff and directors and vice directors. I think this is just nibbling around the edges of something that doesn't really do a whole lot for ham radio, except it will help the field staff, but it's something that we should be able to whip off in a week instead of spending a huge amount of time on it that's been spent, and a lot of arguing too. So I hope they get to a quick resolution on that kind of stuff, because it's one of the things at the end of a board meeting I always ask is, what did we do for ham radio? And unfortunately, it's often not a lot. I would really like to see the board, and I was talking with David Minster about this too, see the board oriented more towards doing things to help our hobby, to save our hobby. So I think we're going to make a concerted effort to do things that are more aligned with what you members want, instead of just dinking around with the bylaws, is what I see it as. Just seems like a waste. One thing you're all probably wondering about, and probably haven't heard enough about, in my opinion, is what's going on legislatively. The Legislative Advocacy Committee is far too silent, in my opinion. There's many more things they could be telling us, but I'm going to tell you a little bit what's going on. We've been working with lobbyists. We actually have a lobbyist that we pay monthly to advocate for us in Washington. And we haven't been too pleased with our current lobbyists. We may make a switch. I don't know what the deal is there. None of the alternatives are particularly cheap, as you might imagine. Given our inability to make things move forward with the FCC, we've actually crafted a bill to direct the FCC to act on these proposals, particularly the symbol rate proposal. And that bill is very close to being introduced at the next Congress. I don't know if I don't think it'll make it into the lame duck, but that bill has been, the wording is done. It's actually going to go before Legislative Council, which means it's very close to being releasable. They're like the last set of reviews. I don't know. I remain skeptical. We'll see if anything comes out of this. It's supposed to be one of these, happy talk bills where they just kind of say, oh yeah, it's so easy. We just pass this thing and be done. I don't know. We'll see. As far as antenna restrictions, that bill's language has been, revamped and ready to go for a long time. Been talking with both senators and congressmen about that one, and there's support on both sides of Congress, both sides of the aisle. The question is how to get it past. I think the current strategy is to attach it to some must-pass legislation, but I don't see a lot of that, actually happening in Washington these days. Nothing really seems to happen. So I'm also a little skeptical about that, but we will see. I mean, I could easily be wrong about this, and we'll continue to support the effort. But I'd like to see some results sooner rather than later, so that we can, chalk that one up and say we got to win there. It's a tough process. You'd be amazed maybe you wouldn't be amazed how convoluted and crazy this whole process of legislation is. It's in no way straightforward, and it's very much, who you know and what you know and who you talk to and whether you're nice to them and all this other stuff that shouldn't matter so much. And we just have to deal with it because the system is what it is. So but we've come to this point where the only way to get the FCC to do anything is to work on legislation, and they say, yeah, okay, fine, and that may direct them to move, but it's just like pushing on a brick wall. They're not very, and it's mostly comes from the commissioners. The commissioners, I'm given to understand that the chairwoman believes that we shouldn't rock the boat on anything, especially as trivial, quote unquote, as amateur radio, and so they're not going to make any changes. I don't know. I just don't understand the reasoning, but there it is. So that's some good news. I mean, there's action there, but it's not cost-free action. There's we have these ongoing expenses, and I told you about the financial situation. And we have these ongoing expenses with lobbyists and such. So it's something that we need to bring to some kind of conclusion relatively soon. It can't go on forever, and either it gets passed or we give up and try a different route. I just don't know what's going to happen. It's just tough stuff. It really is. And there were a couple of sort of inactive things. We talked maybe last year about maybe forming a political action committee. I don't think anything's happened with that. I don't think anything's going to happen with that. It's of marginal benefit in my mind. So I'm not too concerned about that. All the big thing that's sitting out there is all the other pending FCC actions that have gotten no action. And that includes trying to get an entry-level license and several other pending things that have been stuck for literally how many years now? Like 3 to 4, something like that, that we just can't seem to get the government to do its job. And so there it is. There's a bunch of stuff. some of it may have sound pessimistic, and I have to admit that there's, in some ways, I am pessimistic about the state of our hobby as it is. I'm optimistic about the future. I want us to obviously succeed. I've been a ham for 40 plus years. I want this wonderful hobby that gave so much to me and gave so much to all of you to continue for the next 100 years. But it's going to take work on our part. We have to do it. And it's not, I mean, we can do a lot of the heavy lifting at ARRL and other organizations, but we have to come together and try to figure out how to save our hobby, how to make it relevant into the future. That's extremely important. And in order to do that, we're going to have to make some uncomfortable changes, I believe. You know, things that parts of ham radio may not seem like ham radio to you, like FT8 is a sort of an example of the beginning of that. So here's a mode that the computer does most of the work for you, and you basically just hit the return key at some point, and or click on a station. I call it DX Bingo. It's a very simple mode from the user's perspective, very complex inside, but it's kind of like the gateway drug. It gets you in, you know, it gets some people interested that would not otherwise be interested. They can access HF without having to learn a bunch of stuff. And for better or for worse, that's the world we live in. You know, it's a very short attention society, and we have to grab that attention where we can get it. And we may have to go into other realms that are even less ham radio like. You know, my favorite thing to talk about is gamification. I think if you know, we can gamify parts of ham radio, make it into something that these young gamer crowd might be interested in, we might be able to pull in members and money to our hobby. So, you know, start thinking along those lines and think of things that are way out of the box, because I think that's what it'll take to make sure that our hobby continues into the future. And you know, I'm going to try everything I can to make that happen, and Tony will too, and everybody else who works for ARRL, both in a volunteer and staff basis. So there's the optimism piece for you. I don't want to sound like Debbie Downer completely. We have a way forward. We have to think hard. We have to work hard and execute, and we will have a great hobby going in for the next 100 years. So you've listened to me enough. It's time to get your questions. I want to use the hands raised feature, and that will help me keep things straight. And if y'all can stay muted, excuse me, when you are not speaking, that would help a lot. And it doesn't have to be just questions, but even commentary is fine. And let's start with AB7FB.
Actually, it's AC7CE, Kathy. Greetings to all. From a financial perspective, what has Amazon Smile done, or what can we do to, since that's such a big money maker for Amazon, what could we do to make money for ARRL?
So we actually are participating in the Amazon Smile program, although it's not obvious how to do so. But that's some feedback I'll bring back, because we do have a way to do that.
Yes, and I have 106 orders so far this quarter crediting ARRL. But I was wondering, is that just a drop in the bucket for money, or is there a way we can expand that to make it an easy way to have some revenue, I guess is the question.
So the best way to expand it is to use it, I think. And it's not just a drop in the bucket. Every penny counts. And the league is very happy to have that, and has tried to make sure that Amazon in general is just a big part of ARRL's strategy going forward. You know, I think that the league has hired a consultant to help with Amazon marketing, and Smile is a piece of that, but also selling our goods on Amazon is a piece of that as well. So Amazon is something that people are aware of and trying to figure out the best way to I dare I say monetize it to be of benefit for ARL.
Thank you,
Okay,
Kristen.
sure. Next up is K6ST, Barry.
Hey there, thanks Kristen and everybody. Let's see here. So you're 40 years, I'm coming up to 50 years here next month. And it dawned on me after we've lost some older fellows, not always old, but in our club, that I'm not going to call it an all-persons club, but we have to work on the younger folks. So I don't know what that looks like exactly. I'm happen to be the Nevada section youth coordinator. We're making some inroads here. I'd like to do something at least a division level. I'd love to do something at a whole ARRL level, but I'll just leave it at that and love to have the conversation, whatever that looks like. I mean, I was 17, so hallelujah. I don't know how I got to be 67, but there's a lot of fun stuff in it, in the hobby. And, I will say one thing. A lot of people will say, the kids don't want to talk on AM radio, they're doing other stuff, blah, 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 blah. And my experience has been, if you make the connection, we do really good through Scouts, by the way, but if we make the connection with the kids and some organizations like that, they light up pretty quick. We just did as an example, we did a jamboree on the air up here in Reno with some Scout troops and mostly Cubs. And I think there were 35 kids. They didn't all get on the air. They went outside, they had fun. They learned, they talked to people in other areas. And the one that hit me that was amazing was there was this adult woman who's the head of something in the Cubs thing. And she has some sub-program about, helping people and culture and learning. And so the kids got to talk to, it happened to be through DMR of all things, because we have the HF, DMR, and VHF. And they talked to a lot of stations in other countries, Cyprus, Portugal, so on and so forth. And so the adult said, this is so good because this not only helps the kids learn about radio, but it helps them, they had a requirement to do something to talk to somebody in another country. So, I'm not sure that what I did at 17, it totally applies, but I would love to start a movement, something more than just what we're doing here in Nevada, and happy to put it out. So my email address is k6sierratango@arrl.net, and happy to do something to help the younger generation, whatever that looks like. I think online I looked up and it said for one of the events it says 25 and under. So it doesn't have to be necessarily young, but do something in that area. So there's my 2 cents worth. Happy to help. Thank you so much for the call today.
Thank you, Barry, and I really appreciate all of the hard work you've done, and I know we all do. The thing we're finding out is that the number of youth that come in through sort of the traditional method, and I would call that kind of a traditional method where we introduce them to radio and they kind of seem to just gravitate towards it, is actually really small. And it's great to have them. In no way mean to denigrate this demographic at all. But we have to think hard about how to grab like a bigger segment. And I really feel deeply that there's some out of the box thinking that needs to happen here, and to do that.
If I can just add one thing to that, 100% with you. And one of the things that happens, this is not a criticism, it's just a thing, is that because sometimes there's not enough bigger attraction, what people will say, and not any of us, of course, but some people say, well, there's not big enough traction, so we won't do it, So I'm not saying we shouldn't go for the big thing, I think so, but in the meantime, whatever that looks like, the little things add up, whatever that looks like. So I'm all behind it, happy to do what I can, lead a group, help a group, do something. Thanks so much.
Yeah, absolutely, Barry. Like I said, I fully encourage you, and I think it's great work you're doing. And I don't mean to denigrate it in any way. I'll share with you on this topic, my own son experience. And, as you can imagine, growing up in my house, he got a lot of exposure to this thing called ham radio. And he got, enthusiastic, got his technician's license at 11, his general at 13, and never came back. and has had no interest. He's 30 now, electrical engineering, computer science graduate from Berkeley, no interest. And I have tried gently, not nagging, of course, that never works, but try to, get him interested. I showed him FT8 and he says, a little bit interesting, but So, if you can get my son going.
Yeah, there we go. That just brings up an interesting point, and I'll let other people talk. If you think about it in marketing of like what is it cost and energy, money, effort to acquire a customer, a client? Well, this is what it is, right? You can get them in the door. The question is, and can you get them in the door? The question is, will they stay a client and will they do stuff? So I think of it in that way because I don't know. I heard something. It was a crazy ass number, like I don't know, at least 50, maybe it was even a higher percent of all hams in the U.S. aren't active. I was like, how could out of about 780 to 800,000 not be active? So that's part of the puzzle. Okay.
I bet you it's worse.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I know. That's unbelievable. Thanks.
Yeah. So just to give you a couple numbers, and I don't think that ARRL membership is a proxy for activity, but it's sort of an indicator. There's about 700,000 hams in the U.S., something like that, roughly. And there's about 165,000 ARRL members. And so that gives you kind of an idea. So maybe you double that, and that's the number of active hams. But I don't know. We're going to try and actually survey this and get a little more information. So we're working right now on some surveys. All right, let me move on to N6ERL. Peter, you're next.
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate the conversation. Two thoughts. One is the idea of us marketing this activity as a hobby versus as a service. Ham radio is actually a service, and that was created by Congress, and it's a service. So I don't know if we're changing that direction or not. And the other question is there any information or any news on Aries Connect and what's happening with that?
Okay, so I think, let me take them in order. The service part, I think the ARRL tries to talk about it more as a service than a hobby. I think amongst ourselves, we often say hobby almost as a joke because it's so much more than just that. But yeah, I think, and if you look at the columns in QST, and you can see that David Minster sees it very much as a service and service to others. And more than just the governmental meaning of service. Aries Connect, so there's this Form 4, thing on the web. Aries Connect is not coming back, that's for sure. I think Aries is having a little kind of like identity crisis and trying to figure out what it is. And this is all matters for the ECFSC, that committee, that third standing committee that's supposed to be working on that kind of stuff. I would like to have seen them come out with something more by now, but I don't know of anything that's up and coming in that area. Unless, Tony, do you know anything?
No, nothing's been really talked about. I think those forms that they're working on right now, updating those, and then focusing, of course, on the relationship of the field director, vice director, HQ stuff, which I'm going to probably concur that not a great use of our time right now. As I always say is, what's broken or what is the problem? And I haven't really heard that summed up in a way that we do have a problem with that. But yeah, so far, I don't think they've been working. And they actually have a meeting this Sunday, so I'll probably join and see where they're at.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for doing that and listening so I don't have to. But I have been involved in that relationship thing, but it's I'm not happy with the direction of that committee, and I plan to talk to people about that in January. Just I expected a lot more useful action out of them. All right, let's next go to Michael, KB6USJ.
Hello, good morning to you. Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
All right, Kristen and everybody. Yeah, Kristen, I kind of am with you full force on your comments earlier. you know, it has to show some relevance to young people, and of course, it has to have content for them to get sold on this. And you know, I'm trying to experiment here. We're going on a little journey, and the journey is to orbit the Earth in a balloon, and we're going to get a charter school on board to do this. And Barry, yes, I will need your resources because I'm not quite a teacher. I do have a teacher that's going to help us with that. But you know, I did Pacificon with the Scouts years ago, and the one element we sold them on and hope they, and it's still a good program, like you said, is that this thing is fun. It's fun. It's amusing, and you get a chance to do something that's quite different. And this balloon launch that we're going to have with this charter school is going to use a lot of the digital communications that's out there. And you know, another item I'm going to point out is that, like you, Kristen, your son did not go into the hobby, but he used what he learned as a future, as a career. And that's what I'm selling this as it's going to be really interesting. You're going to find out how these radio waves travel, and why we're getting you know, tracking information from a balloon that is over Afghanistan. You know, how does this work? How does this happen? So yeah, I'm very enthusiastic. I'm really stoked about this because you know, I think it's a spirit of innovation. We have to be innovative. We have the youth here, and we have to be innovative. And you know, Steve Jobs, you know, he was an innovative person, as well as Elon Musk, and those are out there. And we have to spur these kids on. And you know, for the you know, bring up the interest for the next moon launch. So yeah, I'm going to need some resources, but I think I'm going to enjoy it all. So back
Sure
to
you
you.
will. All right, thank you, Michael. And yeah, absolutely. And you know, making it relevant, tying it to aerospace, all of that stuff is really great ways to do things. And you know, like I always find it fun to think about. I'm a pilot, so when I'm up in the air and I'm using those VORs, to think about all the interesting radio technology that was developed a long time ago, and the transponders and all that stuff that's still just as relevant today. And there, you know, I also wanted to mention in that context the irony that everything we work with today is wireless, pretty much. You know, we have our cell phones, we have Wi-Fi all over our house, all these little devices doing Bluetooth back and forth, and yet here we are, a service that is focused on wireless communications, and we're still trying to struggle for relevance. So it's an interesting sort of paradox. All
Hey,
right.
Kristen, I just wanted to
yeah,
note one thing kind of
Sure.
on this comment is in QST starting in January, there's something that's, you know, in the member spotlight that's starting to profile, you know, people of kind of, you know, not just amateur radio, you know, related things, but it is related, I guess, but some of the, you know, some of the people that have, you know, used amateur radio to kind of step their career, or, you know, used it as their career building in some sense, or have invented things or done some really cool things. So on page 13 of this month's, you know, this is a start and kickoff of, you know, for the next year, alongside with the Year of Volunteers, to kind of highlight some of these innovators or pioneers, or, you know, people that, you know, they might not be always in amateur radio, but they were rooted or came out of amateur radio and invented some cool things. Even though Joe Taylor in this one, you know, has done a lot for amateur radio, he's done a lot more outside of this. So, you know, ham radio was just kind of a hobby niche, something to do, but yet some of the basis of what he's done to you know, apply to what we're doing today with FT8 and things like that, you know, were impactful. So definitely look at those and maybe provide those as kind of some inspirational type things to those that you're, you know, maybe talking to and saying, hey, look at what these guys and gals are doing.
That's great, Tony. Yeah, and that was another David Minster initiated thing where he asked the board if they knew of any great, impactful hams, and that's what they came out of. Thank you for that. Okay, Tim, you're next. Tim.
This is Tim. Yeah, thank you, Kirsten. This is Tim Barrett, K6BIV. First of all, another great event this morning. Thank you for that. And a couple of questions, or maybe one question, and the other one would be a question / thought. The question would be for you, Kirsten, and maybe Anthony. The league had quite a presence at Pacificon, and I'm just wondering if you've heard back anything specific from them as to how they viewed the Pacificon event. So that'd be the question that you guys can answer. And then the thought. I heard the comment that the IMCOM relevance or the IMCOM activity is substantially lower than it has been. And yet I've heard from, I don't know, probably more than 100 people that IMCOM is the number one purpose because it's number one on the list. Now, obviously the backbone or the underpinnings of amateur radio, it's presented that these are them, and it's not these are them in order. It's just these are them, and IMCOM happens to be the number one listed thing, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's the number one importance. And I remember going to my first IWCE convention. I think it was in 2011. And what I saw mostly that would be offered to the agencies as far as communication technology was so far superior to what really any of the ham community brings to an IMCOM event. And then, Kirsten, your comments about, I think it was in the Southeast, where they brought this infrastructure of network stuff and cellular stuff, and it was a huge hit. But to me, if what our IMCOM people are bringing to the table is a Baofeng handheld, and they think that that's going to be the savior of the day in an IMCOM situation, I think we're missing something, and just would be opening that up for comments.
Okay, thank you, Tim. So I'll take those in order. The Pacificon, I think that the league sees Pacificon as one of the top tier, maybe second tier at worst, hamfests in the nation. It's certainly the premier hamfest in the Western United States. We have more attendees, we have more great technical talks, more enthusiasm and events than anybody on the West side at all. And so there's a large degree of support for that. I've talked it up too, and I've said, come on out, come to Pacificon. Love to see you there. And that, we've not had that kind of support in the past. And I think part of it is, they recognize that we're Silicon Valley and this is where innovation happens and all that stuff. So I think they are very impressed with the Pacificon operation. It's a well-run hamfest, and they very much appreciated that. And I just think the league is committed to making sure that they don't forget the West Coast, because I think for a long time they did. Now to move on to the MCOM thing, yeah, one of the complaints that I've heard other people say, and don't get offended because I'm trying to repeat what someone else said and paraphrase it, is that when somebody, one of our ham people shows up at some, even a training event or something with the shack on the belt and the kind of ratty looking appearance, that the government agencies are not impressed. They think that these people are a little bit crazy, which we are inherently. That's not a bad thing, but the degree of professionalism they're looking for is not that. And they, again, the digital stuff, like Tim said, their own digital stuff, the shares HF, they have the HF covered in a way. We have to find a different way. We don't have the unique resources that we once did. Even the argument that they can't pull together their diverse radio systems is kind of falling by the wayside, because they're beginning to get their act together there and be able to connect these things together. And that may be different in your local area. So I know that there are exceptions, and some people have, some agencies have a better time than others. But I think that in order to make sure that we are in an important resource in the future, we have to rethink our relationship with emergency communications. This is not the ARRL's opinion, this is mine. But we have, and I can just see it coming. You know, we have to change our thinking, just like we have to change our thinking around youth in order to remain relevant. You know, this has been our big selling point. This has been our big selling point with Congress. It's a way we justify the use of this very valuable spectrum, but we need to think deeper about this. So that's my call, is to think deeper, more deeply about this. Okay, thanks, Tim. Next is Daryl, W7LTM.
Okay, am I here?
I think so.
Okay, you got me?
Yeah, by the way, I'm just taking this in the order that's
Yeah,
presented.
no, that's fine.
in the
I just
Zoom
want to make
thing.
sure that, I want to make sure you're hearing me. Okay. All right,
Okay.
mine is, I am Daryl, W7LTM. I'm the Army Mars Region 9 liaison for the Mars program for Army Mars. And my one big thing I want to do is reference the ARRL set that took place in October and the interface with the Mars program, which included Army and Air Force Mars, with the ARRL sets that were taking place and passing the message from Northcom, who is responsible for the defense of CONUS, the whole United States. And within Region 9, we successfully passed 25 messages to different ARRL or clubs, areas, whatever the message for Northcom. And out of that, what we had from the national level was there was like 102 to 112 messages actually delivered. We delivered 25 within our region here. And so I want to give hats off to the different hams that we worked with, because the Mars people were dictated to come onto the amateur frequencies, use your amateur digital modes or whatever, and coordinate with you as to how we would pass the message. So we did it on a non-interference basis for your actually set activity. And that, I just want to say hats off, because I talked to 36 different ones that I know of for sure that helped us coordinate the 25 sets with the 10 different Mars members that I used. And this is the first time that from the national military side that we've been dedicated to go out and interface like we did, coordinated with ARRL headquarters to actually interface, deliver traffic. And I hopefully I see it as more of us having requests for information on our side as Mars and coming to the amateur group on their frequencies and their modes and getting the information to send back to DOD. And that's going to help us both. And also where you mentioned the shares and the interface that the different digital modes. That's where we build this relationship like we started in October. That's going to help us because we come as the Mars member on the amateur frequencies, talking to you as amateurs, and we get that information that DOD is requesting. We take it back to them and get it back to them in their own digital mode, but we worked with you in the amateur mode. So I may have missed something, but I had talked to 36 amateurs within the Pacific Division here and a little bit in the Southwest and Southern California. So I just want to say thanks very much for all those that worked with us. And I had zero negative comments. Everybody was open and willing and more than willing to helpful to work with us. And that is greatly appreciated. So that's what I just want to say as a thank you.
Thank you, Daryl. And thank you for all your hard work on that. And there's something that came up recently that I caught my eye was, we have a crossband event for Armed Forces Day, I believe it is. And that is specifically a carve out in the rules that allow us to work crossband on that particular day. And there was a little bit of talk on the board of maybe putting something before the FCC to expand that to be any day that crossband event is specified to be able to do that, because there's another operation right now that had to get a waiver in order to do this. All right, thank you. Let's next go to Alan, W6WN.
Hey, good morning, Kristen, and everybody that's on the group. And Kristen, thanks for putting this on. Well, I'll tell you, just listening to the comments and your reports and so on, I don't know where to start here. MCOM, let's talk about that. You know, it was mentioned that the served agencies don't need us as much. So I think our response is to find something else to do with that public service Jones or desire. So I'm up in El Dorado County. I'm the public information officer for the El Dorado County Amateur Radio Club, and also the Community Emergency Radio Association, which is just a brand new 501c that we started specifically with this in mind. And anybody who's heard me speak knows that I sing the same tune, which is to put the focus on the public and try and shift that emergency communications response over to the people that really need it. If the served agencies have all this great equipment and they don't need us as much, think about the people who don't have that equipment. And that's all the folks that have to evacuate during a disaster, if there's a fire, if there's an earthquake, a tornado, or a hurricane, and the cell phones go down and the internet goes down and they don't have a way to communicate. So I think there's a real opportunity that people should start thinking about, kind of shift our thinking over towards the general public, because that's where we're going to also get our future ham radio operators. And in terms of relevance, you know, think about what we do at a club meeting is just one small example. And these are not my ideas. This is stuff I picked up from other people. But we have a typical club meeting and we all get together and we have a business meeting, and then we might have a presentation or two. But the one thing that we don't do at most club meetings is actually get on the radio. And that's kind of that's a stopper for a lot of young people. When they come into this hobby, they really want to know about the radio stuff. They don't want to sit through a business meeting. So I think we need to re-examine what we're doing with club meetings and maybe pair some of this stuff off. Maybe you have a separate meeting for all the business stuff, get that out of the way, but don't drag the general membership into those meetings. There is a couple of, if you're familiar with QSO Today, Eric Guth has got a couple of really good interviews there. One is with Ed Kammerer, and I know, Kristen, you know Ed. He's
Fred.
Fred Kammerer, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And I forget Fred's title.
He is director of the New England division.
New England division, okay. Catch the QSO Today interview with Fred, because those guys are doing quite a bit with the youth up there in their area. They do things like during field day, they give their young members first shot at all of the primary chairs for field day. They put them on the radio. They back off. All the old timers just back off, and they'll fill in around them. But they really try to put the focus on the youth there. And then there's another QSO Today interview with Connor Black and CJ Pokawitz. And they're a couple of 20-somethings, and they're big gamers. And listen to some of the things that they have to say about their observations about club meetings and the hobby and what appeals to them. And one of the things that they mentioned, which is a subject that I know is near and dear to Kristen, is gamification. And maybe, Kristen, you might even explain a little bit more about gamification, because I'm going to guess there's a lot of people that are on this call that don't really understand what that means or how that applies with amateur radio. And that's all I got, but glad everybody made it to the meeting today.
Thank you, Alan. Great stuff. And yeah, absolutely. You know, as you all know, I was president of PARA for 12 years, something like that. And well, you know, I'm certainly not perfect, but one of the things we definitely did not do is bring business to the general meetings. That's what the board meetings were for. But gamification. So the idea of gamification is to turn, kind of mix the two together. Mix, you know, the way I think about it is this. So let's say maybe the game is kind of the primary interface to the world, where someone comes in and plays a game, but the backbone of, say, the quest or whatever it is in that gaming script is RF. And RF and its fickle nature, its propagation, things like that. And I mean real RF, not simulated RF, although that could be part of it too. That is how how the communication of whatever it is that's communicated, whether that's data or voice or whatever, becomes the thing that drives the mystery or drives the adventure within the game. And maybe it's if you know CW, you do better, or something like that. You know, something that motivates you to get these rewards as you progress through the game. And there's got to be like instant feedback, stuff that's it doesn't take a long time. It's got to be like instantaneous. The internet is probably involved in this too. So the idea would be to like get people hooked by playing around in this world in a way that's not the typical way to play around in it. And then hopefully they get down to the nuts and bolts and say, hey, I'm really interested in the actual technology that makes this thing tick. Anyway, that's my view of it. You may have a different one. Let's next go to AI6DG, Joel.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Good stuff. Thanks for being there and doing this. A comment and then a question. The comment being, what is ham radio? And it's such a diverse hobby that it's different for everyone, whether it's a service for some, a hobby for others, whether MCOM's a component of their interest, or digital or CW or whatever. That just makes it so much more a challenge, I think, to present what ham radio is and to determine what the way forward is. So I'm not sure there's an easy answer to any of that. So just look forward to wherever we're going. The question is, can you kind of compare the state of ham radio, the state of the hobby in the Pacific Division versus the other divisions in the US? How are we doing? How are they doing?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think the Pacific Division is not very conflicted, I would say. So we in the Pacific Division, we go about our business with ham radio, and we have a lot of fun. And there's sort of a not much infighting, which I kind of like to see, where people are cooperating and trying to get stuff done. I'm sure each of you has your little pet peeves with one thing or another, with the interacting with other people. But there are some divisions where things are really contentious, and not in a particularly productive way. And I'm not going to single any of them out. But we're more geographically dispersed, and so we tend to not have as much close communication as, say, the Hudson Division, which is the smallest division up in the Northeast, or even the Southeastern Division. They're all kind of clumped together and a lot more interactive because of that physical clumping. So I guess those are the biggest differences. I think just about everybody on the board, each of the divisions, are active representatives before the ARRL, participating in committees and conversations around the direction of ham radio. So there's no big difference there that I can see. But maybe we just have a little less controversy out here, which can be good, can also be bad, but I think it's good in this case. Hopefully that answered your question. All right, let's see, NI6A Don, you're next. Don, are you there? I think you're talking, but you're muted.
Okay, there it goes.
There you go.
Okay, well, first, Kristen, thank you for making this opportunity to get input and also to communicate to us about what's going on from headquarters. I first joined the league in 1957 and got my general in 58, and been involved in many different aspects of amateur radio. I'm not terribly technically advanced, but still learning after all these years. So I'd like to just address a few items. They're all like interconnected. First thing I would like to say is like controversy is good. We should address our problems openly without any kind of emotional factors. Just try to logically, intellectually solve our problems. Okay. And, you know, we mentioned we have problems. That's good. We have to identify the problems. So just some five basic points I have. And one is like, it's, in my opinion, technology by itself isn't necessarily going to further our goals and missions or help ham radio. It's the use of the technology in which we identify with being, you know, like using the technology in a positive way, in a meaningful way that gets enthusiasm going with membership and saying, well, what can I do with this technology? So sometimes people might lose sight of the technology is going to solve our problems just by itself. So I just wanted to address that because I see that a lot. It's pretty common. So what is our purpose and methodology, say, in public service? Okay, if I could look at the past, it's pretty, and the future, it's pretty obvious that the government agencies we have to recognize that they're pushing away volunteers, the government employees for reasons of security. That's not going to change as right now. I mean, hopefully in the future, it might change, but I think we're not going to look like with open doors like we used to have. And also, I don't like that meme at all. The ham, you know, coming in with his tin cap on with a payphone handheld, you know, knocking on the door of a emergency operating center. Let's put that away. I think that might have happened once, maybe happened twice, but it's not the people I know, at least, and who are dedicated for public service. But our relationship, we say where I am, it's very difficult to get the foot in the door. Matter of fact, we've been pretty much losing ground with government agencies, and we have to look at that. And one approach has been like we have to take more training, more security clearances and stuff, but that turns off a lot of the younger people, and it's not really good for the volunteer spirit. So okay, so we're just like, how do we repurpose? Can we go direct? I really liked what W6WN Alan said about moving more towards the community directly. What are the needs of our neighbors, of our public? You know, during a disaster here, we're talking mostly about earthquakes. Will conventional communications be available? Most likely in a larger earthquake, it won't. So what do? We could provide all kinds of communications, either within a CERT context, if CERT is active in your area, or work with locally concerned citizens, okay, groups, non-government organizations, etc., and provide communications for the victims, for the people directly. I'm not against providing communications for the agencies, but they might not be there for the first 24, 48 hours. Most likely, it might take a little longer. Even the Red Cross in our area has been centralized. Okay, so I won't go into any details on that, but we could look at getting volunteers more enthusiastic about helping their neighbors directly in community public service organizations. And that might bring some people in who don't really want to get too involved with ICS training. And so who is our clients and stakeholders? We can look at or reevaluate that, and then volunteerism. more hams who can see their meaningful participation with it, to help their neighbors is a enthusiastic type of motivational methodology that can get people. It could be digital, it could be voice. What will happen the first 24 to 48 hours? Areas groups should look at that, or any kind of public service hams. We have communication abilities. Okay, so even when I was 12 years old, I was a member of Aries, and everyone just naturally said, "Yeah, sure, I got a radio. I can provide communications." And we didn't have that many disasters at that time, hardly any. But later on, and with earthquakes and stuff, I've served in floods and earthquakes, and I'm now a district emergency coordinator for Contra Costa County. So those are the things I'd like to see. Maybe we can reevaluate as far as how do we put all that together? Volunteerism, enthusiasm, more hams who want to help their neighbors, and get more membership as a method, as all together, actually, as an integrated method. So I hope that that could be considered without demeaning the work that people are doing with national and state agencies, which might not be as supportive as some might think. Okay, thanks a lot again, Kristen, and everyone else who's come in and left their ideas.
Excuse me. Thanks very much for your comments, Don. And just a programming note, I have about 3 in the queue, and we're going to end the queue there for Q&A, since we're getting close to noon here, and I'm sure y'all have your days to get going, and I do too. So those will be the 3 final comments. So let's go to Dan, WL7 COO.
Well, thank you. And thank you especially for convening this large body of Pacific Division amateur radio operators. I'm sure you know what my concerns are, and they mirror what you were saying, Kristen, about the ESFC committee. Is that a
ECFSC?
ECFSC, okay. And I shouldn't use committee because that's already part of the acronym. How do I say this? I'm seeing much greater reliance on amateur radio service volunteers in all other jurisdictions I have anything to do with as a section emergency coordinator, and elsewhere throughout the state of California, comprehensively, for fairly specialized use of their amateur radio skills. And the beginnings of that, I think, were made evident in advance in the 2018 Hamvention, where the FCC forum interviewed fairly high-placed officials from, I think, 11 federal agencies. And every one of them said that, and interestingly enough, every one of them was an amateur radio operator. Okay, so they have, they're walking the line with a foot in each world. And they said that WinLink was the for emergency communications. And that's being proven the case. So I feel for ARRLs struggling with, because used to be amateur radio emergency communications was the domain of ARRL. And that's where we all went to, and we studied all the ARES documentation and manuals. We took all the courses, and yet and still local authority, all emergencies are local, and nobody was impressed with ARES. They were impressed with individuals who could support their mission. And somehow, until that's realized at the organizational level, I don't see that this can be turned around. And I'm hoping that both you and Tony
grasp that and will be able to, help guide future ARRL thinking in that direction. I gotta thank Tony, because I think were it not for him, I wouldn't have tumbled across any tone radios. And from where I'm sitting now, I just counted, and I think I could reach 7 of them, although 4 or 5 of them are engaged in useful work at the moment. And that's, so it's sad that it has to be contentious. I think the realization, and you've really, you nailed it on the head. You said it's a waste of time. Because ARRL does need to focus on getting new amateur radio licensees and training them, doing the basic training. And it just seems like it's traumatic to try to envision or communicate with or help the committee that's responsible for the emergency communications aspect of ARRL, when in your heart, you don't see that they get it. So I'll stop there and thank you again for doing all this. And I have to defend John for not being here. He's I think probably being a VEC at a VEC session right now.
Yeah, I saw him pop in briefly. Thank you, Dan.
Okay.
Yeah. That's great to hear, though, that that you're seeing increased activity in California. That's a positive note. And I think everybody will acknowledge that WinLink is an extremely important part of this MCOM picture and ham radio. That's a game changer in many ways. But Aries, it's just going to have to figure it out. And I've been trying to not dive into the ECFSC very much, but I think I'm going to have to, because it's just not doing what I want.
And one last thing is, I'm real impressed that Daryl showed up here and talked about his involvement in the Army Mars exercise. That in itself is progress.
Yep, that is. Absolutely. All right. Next up, Thad, my old colleague there. You're next.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Thaddeus, K3HFS. I've been in the Bay Area about 13 years. And I wanted to talk a little bit about getting people into the hobby. As Kristen knows, I used to run a Wednesday Zoom meeting at a corporate location. And we started off with nobody. And we grew it to a fairly large group over 2 years. And we observed a couple of things that I think are worth relating. I've been a ham since the dark ages, back when there were actual clubs that you could go to and sit down at a radio and learn how to tune and operate. And there was always someone around to help you out. We lost that with the internet. And so one of the things that we noticed with the Wednesday meetings that I was running were people were coming to find out about what this thing was. And so we sort of got that down to where we explained what was going on. But the other thing that we noticed was a lot of people came in with fairly stilted versions of what they thought the hobby was. And after they got there and looked around and actually met people who spoke English, and I'll come back to that in a second, they were really impressed, and a lot of them went on to get their licenses. And I think we graduated half a dozen or a dozen over 2 years, which doesn't sound like much, but it took a lot of work to get them through. The other thing we learned was amateur radio has a lot of jargon. I would introduce myself as Thaddeus, and only later would I tell you what my call sign was, especially when people were unlicensed. Somebody made a joke one day, because 2 of us got into a fairly deep conversation, that's what it sounds like when the adults talk. And one of the things we made a huge conscious effort to do was not use acronyms, to explain things to people, and it worked. And they stuck around. Now, we had a couple people who saw the licenses as a challenge. And we had one member go from tech to extra in 8 weeks, which I thought was interesting. And then they lost interest and left. Because to them, the challenge was only to get the license, achieve the highest grade, and then they had no interest in actually operating. Yes. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so my wife just mentioned, all of this is high touch. We ran a Slack channel where we answered questions daily, you know, in between doing what we were supposed to be doing for our jobs. We've lost all of that, partly due to COVID, but partly because there's no place to go to operate anymore. And so field day is the only time of year people get together really to operate. And I can't tell you the number of hours I've spent on the phone getting people up on FT8. And, you know, I just see this as stuff we ought to all be doing all the time. So I'm going to leave it there.
High touch, ongoing.
Yeah, my wife says high touch, ongoing.
Personal.
It's all about personal relationships. And the group that I started at the company I worked at is still up and running. And from what I understand, it's doing really well. That's another place to go recruit if you're still working, by the way. And I'm going to leave it there.
All right, thanks so much, Thad. And yeah, great work and high touch. I like it. And that's something that also applies to clubs. So, you know, a lot of times, and we've all heard these stories, right? You go to the club and, you know, nobody will come over and talk to you or anything like that. You just kind of look around and they're all looking at you. They're not even looking at you. They'd ignore you. And one thing we tried to do at Para was to not do that. I always encourage the board members of Para to get out and circulate and talk to, especially people they didn't know, so that you would make them feel welcome. And that's just one aspect of what Thad is talking about there. So I think that's really good advice and a really good way to move forward. Thanks, Thad. And last on my list here is WH7 Echo Zulu, Everett in Maui.
Hello, everyone. First off, Kristen, thank you very much for the meeting here. And then next, I'd actually like to acknowledge also Clem Jung. He is the Pacific Aries Section Emergency Coordinator. He's on as well right now. I actually work for emergency management here in Maui County. I am the one of my responsibilities is a communications officer. So it encompasses pretty much everything in communications, including amateur radio, as well as the CERT program manager. So all the things you folks that everyone's been commenting about, I've actually seen and are involved with. First off, I want to tackle really the served agencies on the Aries side. I am actually the Maui County Community Emergency Coordinator. So I work with Bill Hyde, who is the District Emergency Coordinator for Aries, along with the guidance from Clem. It does appear different to be in every district, every section, or every area of the country. Here in Hawaii, specifically, we really have a good relationship with served agencies. Not just specifically Hawaii VOAD, but also with government agencies. And I can attest to how it is here in Maui County because I'm involved with it. Yes, it is challenging to go in and actually fit in with the requirements from government, with training, with ICS, things like that. But it's something that we have to embrace. We have to, as an organization, as operators, be able to fulfill that need, but also and kind of fulfill those requirements, because government does require the training. And what that does is actually gives that credibility to emergency communications, and in our context specifically ARES. I must say Clem has done a real good job in Hawaii, leading that effort in order to things like WinLink, being able to show that we have relevance because we can communicate what is required at the EOC for ICS forms, things like that. All those
Did we lose Everett there?
as amateur radio operators, we have to go and really look at that. Other part of it I wanted to actually touch upon is CERT. As you can see, my background, the Maui County CERT, and I mentioned I'm the program manager. I'm also involved on the national level with CERT through the National CERT Association. And CISA has approached National CERT Association to incorporate the OXCOM program, an actual specific training within CERT. And OXCOM, amateur radio, is part of OXCOM, for those of you who have gone through training. So we started that. Actually, I'm spearheading the committee on the OXCOM training for CERT on a national level. And we just started that a couple months ago. Okay. As far as, let's see what else. As far as the rest of the things, like I said, I actually tried to get involved, tried to get my license back when I was 17, 18. Unfortunately, I did not at the time when my father, who's an extra, holds an extra class, he tried to get me involved. And as with some have said, getting your kids involved is a little bit challenging when they're a little bit younger. But I actually finally got my license in 2007 as a general, and I'm working my way up right now towards trying to get my extra. But it is connecting with those younger generations of what is interesting with them to kind of hook them in, and those generational gaps kind of fit in. Trying knowing what those what generation, what is it, X, generation Y, Z, millennials, whatever it may be, trying to figure out what their mind is thinking, and having that hook with amateur radio. So a lot of great ideas. I would definitely love to try to get involved with the what is it called, the IFCS or the
ECFSC.
Yeah, ECFS, yes. And maybe connect some of those dots from the different things I'm involved with locally and nationally. But I appreciate the time, Kristen, and have a wonderful holiday season.
All right. Excuse me. Thank you very much, Everett. Appreciate all of your comments. And yeah, training. We have to be professional if we're going to be part of the emergency communications infrastructure, as it stands. All right. Well, I promised that was the end of it, and I think we're there. I really want to thank each and every one of you for taking the time to come here and visit with us, and particularly those who spoke up and told us what their thoughts are and ask questions, and help to, each time you do that, you make the division stronger and better, and amateur radio as well as the ARRL benefit from all of that. I'm always available to talk or chit chat on email or text or whatever. Feel free to reach out to me and let me know your thoughts on things. And we do have a board meeting coming up on the 20th, around that week. I think that's the start of the board meeting. It's the 20th of January out in good old Newington, where the weather's going to be wonderful, I'm sure. So anything before that would be even better than afterwards, but I'll take anything I can get. So thanks so much. You are the people that make ham radio what it is. You make it work. We just stand up there and handle the rocks you throw at us and try and make something good out of that. So I want to wish you all a wonderful holiday season. Have fun out there. Be careful of the rain if you're in the Northern California area. I know it's kind of raining on and off here. And I hope to see you at a club meeting soon. And you have a wonderful day and a wonderful weekend. Take care, everybody.
Thanks,
7-3.
Kristen. Thanks, Kristen. 7-3.